All right.
You're listening to The Voice, 17104.com.
Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to the Richard James Show on 17104, The Voice.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Richard James Show. It's always a pleasure to come week to week to present you very important and very valuable information. Not so much to lift up Richard James, but to lift up information that is very vital to our existence. We're going back in history. History is another thing that I love. I love to know history. Not all of our history was very positive. It's not going to be that way, but it's very real. There's an individual that was a part of our government for over 50 years and was the director of the FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, under 8 individual presidents. One might say that he's probably the greatest director that agency the time in history has known. His name, and also one of the most hated individuals in the African American community. I don't know of any one individual that the African American community lifts up in hatred than J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover, interesting character. J. Edgar Hoover, for 8 presidents, set the tone. Under his administration, a number of African American leaders lost their lives. Some people say that he was complicit in the murder of Fred Hampton, one of the heads of the Black Panther Party back in the day. Some people say he was complicit in the murder of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He set his guns after ML King. He lifted up and presented false information and some negative information that may have some basis. He threw it out at King with an anonymous letter that was sent to him threatening him and telling him he would be exposed. That was the guy that did it. I don't know if he was involved in the murder of Patrice Lumumba, but we've seen videos where the agents that actually carried out the assassination were representative of the Central Intelligence Agency, this country. Look like we're living in a tale of two countries, close to what Dickinson called a tale of two cities. We've had some wonderful programs that lift up democracy, and we have fought for democracy on one hand. That's true. We fought for democracy. Right now, President Biden is supporting the Ukrainian government against the subterfuge and the attacks of Russia on their independence, fighting for democracy. We fought against Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was one of the greatest tyrants that the world has ever known or ever seen. He was a killer. He was a racist. He was a sexist. This country, along with Great Britain and other allies, fought against Hitler. So we do have a record in this country of, of lifting up democracy, fighting for peace and justice. But the flip side of that is the greatest enemy of affirmative action, equal opportunity, civil rights was Brother Hoover. Well, he said Brother Hoover. Why did I say Brother Hoover? Why would I call a man who was a racist, a man who was implicit in the murder of some of our leadership, a brother. Some individuals indicate that J. Edgar Hoover had an African strain in his ancestry. Are you hearing what I'm saying? We had a black president. We have a black vice president, but we also had a director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation for over 50 years. 50 years that had African ancestry. Now, I'm presenting to you, I got a couple of videos that I'm going to share with you, and then we're going to look at those videos. One thing that Hoover was responsible for is a program to have surveillance on civil rights leaders. They would tap their phone, they would watch them from afar, and sometimes they would try to do harm to those individuals. I know all about that program because I was a part of it. When I was very, very active in civil rights, my phone was being tapped. That's a fact. My phone was being tapped. I had several attempts on my life. I can't say it was the government that did it. But thank God they weren't successful attempts. I've lived to be a ripe old age of 80. But it happened. And at the same time, I received a position with Community Action Program, where we lifted up programs that would help lift up the community. In the city of Harrisburg, I was at one point elected president of the board of the directors of the Cumberland, Dauphin, and Perry County Commission on Economic Opportunity. This is a program that was funded by the U.S. government. And at the same time, government agencies were watching us from afar. A lot of the civil rights movement leaders would come to my center and would work with us. And so we were on the right side and on the left side. We tried to do the thing that was right, and quite often we were blamed and cursed for that. But let's take a look at some of these videos. Let's start out with a video. Remember brother Tony Brown. Let's lift up, and we're going to see one of his one of the cousins. And this is a cousin of J. Edgar Hoover. Let's roll it.
Very much for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
Your book, Secrets Uncovered, J. Edgar Hoover, Passing for White. And I said passing for white because there's a question mark. Why the title, Passing for White, question mark?
Because when I first started writing the book, I did not realize that J. Edgar Hoover was actually in my lineage, and I was told it was rumors in the family that he was, and just rumors. So I knew that I had to put question mark until I did some research and made out for sure that he was a part of the family.
Now, this is a pretty serious charge, and not because there's anything wrong with being black, but because of the other implications. Do you feel comfortable making this charge that J. Edgar Hoover, are you saying, in effect, he was black? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying, in fact, that I'm a black woman and he is in my family lineage. He is a part of my family. I don't necessarily like it. I didn't even know it when I started it. But when I found it out, I was looking for my great-great-grandmother, who is Emily Allen, who had babies by his ancestors. And after doing my research, after 2.5 years of research, I have, without a shadow of a doubt, in my heart and the documents, showing that he is a part of our lineage. Now, to say that he's passing for white or he is black, I personally wouldn't say that. I would say that he has black blood in his veins.
What does that make him to you in terms of relative?
My grandfather, my mother's father, is his second cousin.
And that makes him what to you?
That makes him my fourth cousin.
Fourth cousin.
Yes.
And what part of the country are you from? Is your family from?
My family, I was born in Mississippi, Macomb, Mississippi, and my family is from Macomb, Mississippi, Summit, Mississippi, which is where the Hoover plantation is in Summit, Mississippi. I would say the 9 children that my grandmother had by Master Hoover, they are, a lot of them are passing for white. My grandfather's father married a black woman, a mulatto woman, and my grandfather himself married a Choctaw Indian, which that's what I am, an Indian, and black. Even the white people are proud of the book, the ones that I've spoken to, and they agree with me that my grandmother, well that's how I closed all the research, by getting documents from them, because we have to keep in mind that black history, handed down oral history, is not documented history. And 2.5 years of research looking for oral history, I won't find it. So after doing some radio announcements about what I had found in the pedigree chart, and from word of mouth and from rumors, one of the Hoovers, a couple of the Hoover family members heard it, and they had also been doing research of their own and trying to find out themselves, how did J. Edgar Hoover actually belong to the white side of the family. And they couldn't understand it. They could find all of the birth certificates of everybody else in their family, but they couldn't find J. Edgar Hoover.
Now, the people you're saying they, are these white people
These
who are
white,
Hoovers?
These are the white Hoovers.
Well, why would white Hoovers be interested in whether or not J. Edgar Hoover was black or white? What's their motive?
I would think because of the way they were treated by J. Edgar Hoover when he was alive, and the family have wondered why they were treated the way they were treated.
How were they treated by him?
Well, pretty bad, where they weren't really considered a family member to them. They were disinherited from in his will. He had nieces and nephews, and he disinherited them. And it's not that I believe they wanted money from him. They just wanted to know why he would attach himself and then be so cold-hearted and treat them so distant, you know. The information that I found, a picture that he put in his biography saying that it was him. And it wasn't. It was one of the white Hoover boys. Well, I wouldn't say he was actually white, because it seems like, according to the research, he was mulatto too. I wasn't doing research to find out and discover and say that he was also a black man.
Now, this is his brother.
This is the one that he called his brother.
Now, this is his picture, which is in the Hoover Room at the Masonic Shrine,
right,
in Washington, D.C.
Exactly.
And when you go into the Masonic Shrine, there is a man and a woman identified as J. Edgar Hoover's parents with a little boy.
Exactly.
For years, this little boy was identified as J. Edgar Hoover. Mm-hmm. Now, I believe he's identified as Davidson Hoover.
He's identified,
who is J. Edgar Hoover's brother.
Yes, Dickerson.
Dickerson.
Dickerson was 15 years older than J. Edgar Hoover. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the picture, you look very close at the picture in my book, the paper on that picture shows that it was much older than J. Edgar Hoover. It was made before, but he said that that's when he was 5 years old. And he has a picture of him when he was 4 years old. And you look at them, you can see that it's two different faces.
There was a picture that is still in the Masonic Shrine in Washington, D.C.
Right.
That for years, in the identification on the picture, it identified it as J. Edgar Hoover, the little boy.
That's right.
At one point in time, at the Masonic Shrine, they changed that identification to Dickerson Hoover rather than J. Edgar Hoover.
Exactly.
So something had to happen that made the officials at the Masonic Shrine change the identification of that little boy's picture. For years, in the black community, it has been a widespread rumor during J. Edgar Hoover's life that he was a black who was passing for white.
Exactly.
This does not mean that's true. This means that it is true that there has been, for decades, during his life, even among whites, even at the FBI, and according to your book, even Hoover was aware there were rumors that he was a mulatto. And you quote a very famous white man here who we will not name, who grew up in Washington, D.C. at the same time, who you quote as saying that he also heard the rumor and that it was believed among the whites in his community, in his circle, that J. Edgar Hoover was passing for white.
The document that I found in research in the library of his birth certificate being forged is where in Washington, D.C., the mother and father list their names and they list a number to go find the child's birth certificate. Someone went into the file and wrote in handwritten his name and wrote a code WM, white male, and all the other parents on that list never list a child's name or whether it was white or black, which send up a red flag to me.
You said wrote in his name.
Wrote in J. Edgar Hoover's name under his parents. That's the only baby that was written in on that whole page, which sent a
The rest of it was typed.
They were all handwritten. Everybody's name was handwritten. The parents would go in and log your name, and you would log. Then this clerk would log a number that you go to, and then you pull the records and you look for the child's name and gender and that. But on this record, someone went in and actually wrote J. Edgar Hoover, his date of birth, and a code WM, which didn't make sense to me. Who cares? I mean, nobody else in that whole page did that on hardly anything.
In other words, no other baby on that page was identified by race but J. Edgar
Or
Hoover.
name.
Or name.
Or name.
And they all had a code number that you went to.
That's right.
But in his case, there was not only a name, there was also WM designating him as a white male.
Exactly.
And that sent up a red flag. It made you suspect something, right?
Right. And then when I got the anonymous package from the family, I read and looked into it and found documents showing that my grandmother was owned by his relatives. And then the birth certificate finally came, and I noticed that in order for him to get a birth certificate, he had to take his brother, who was in that picture, Dickerson, with him all around Washington, D.C., to different churches to get him to do a statement and have it notarized saying that he saw him being born in the house. He was 15 years old, and he saw J. Edgar Hoover being born by his mother.
Now, which of J. Edgar Hoover's parents allegedly is of an African ancestry, the mother or the father?
It would be allegedly the father would be the mulatto. But I understand through my research, the mother was mulatto, too.
When you started the research in Mississippi, you say that the White Hoover family, some of them anyway, were very much in tune to what you were doing, and they wanted to help you in your research. What did you find out? What is the lineage? What is the line in your family that gets us, that connects your family to the Hoovers, to the white part of your background?
My great-great-grandmother, Emily Allen, was impregnated by the slave master with her first child, and her first child was called Ivy Hoover because he was born on Master Hoover's birthday. Master Christian Hoover was born on November 24th, and so was his son by my great-great-grandmother, which was named Ivy Hoover. These were handed down stories. These were nothing documented. So that's what started this book, was the handed down oral history told to me by my grandfather and my mother for years. Those are stories that I remember my mother telling.
You know, I'd like to interject this. I remember years ago, I interviewed one of the top white historians in America who lives in Virginia. And he was for years the historian who refuted any possibility that Thomas Jefferson could possibly have had children consecutively by a black woman. And he rested his case on the fact that Thomas Jefferson just had too much character to have a relationship with a black woman. I'm not saying that what you're saying is right nor wrong. I have no idea. I'm getting the information from you. But I am saying that one should keep in mind when listening to stories such as yours that what you're saying was conventional. It was the way America was.
Exactly.
White men who had property, which were black females, and in your book you talk about black women were frequently used as, quote, bed warmers. Now, by that you mean they were in intimate relationships?
It was a term that the slave master used for when he wanted to warm in his bed. It was actually rape, but she would have to
bed
take
warming
care
was
of
the
him.
conventional term. I'm saying for those people, particularly the young people who may say, how in the world could that have happened? That's the way things were during that time.
Right. And parents and grandparents always told those stories because we had no documents. Of course, the slave master is not going to make record that he bed-warmed one of his slaves and made children with her. Even back that time, you couldn't even name your children, his surname, which was surprising to me that this one child, and that's what always intrigued me by the story, that they had 8, well, at that time they just said a bunch of children. I know now, because I've done the research, how many. But she just said a bunch of Allens and one Hoover. And my mother said she would always wonder, why is Uncle Ivy a Hoover and all the rest of them, they're all Mommy Emily's children? And so she said one day she asked, and they told her that, oh, he looked more like the master. And I believed that as I grew, but after doing the research, I had to be logical and try to figure it out. I wanted to figure it out. Was it really because he was whiter or he was more like the master? No, they all were. When I look at the pictures, they all were white. They all looked white. And what it really was is that this child, this one child, was by the master. He wheeled her in a wheel to his son, who was William Hoover, which the other 7 children were fathered. So, and also the master, who is Christian Hoover, who impregnated her first with Ivy, was born November 24th, and so was Ivy. So I put that together and I said, first son, by the master on his birthday. He felt good about that. I'm going to name this son Hoover, which I felt was the mistake.
Did a little detective work.
Right. Yes, I did. 2 years of really trying to analyze. I mean, I took this history and I analyzed it, age and dates, and I put it together, who was first and what they did. That's how I walked through it.
Did you get any professional help?
Oh, yes. I had to. I called Salt Lake City because I went on the internet and couldn't find anything. It just kept saying no documents and when I would check into the Hoover lineage. So I called Salt Lake City, the Mormon church, the library there, they had everything. So I got in touch with a genealogist by the name of George Ott, who is very, very good. He does studies, he does teaching, and we hired him. And he worked with us for over 2 years.
You paid him to
Oh,
do
yes, we paid him.
Now, and he is an acknowledged expert in this area?
He is.
What were his conclusions? What were his findings?
His finding is that he said to me, Millie, he said, your oral history and the writing of your book, what I read in your story, matches documents better than when because he has a lot to do with Alex Haley's book. And his book was oral. A lot of it was oral history, handed down stories.
Alex Haley.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so he said, your documents match more. And then the documents that were sent to me by the family, the wills, the death certificates, and the birth certificates, he said, I'm convinced that without a shadow of a doubt that your grandfather did not lie to you when they told you your oral history.
There's another interesting phenomenon that you develop in your book, and that is there was a particular specialized underground railroad for light-skinned blacks from the South to get to Washington, D.C., and then to set them up so they could pass for white people.
Yes, I thought that was the most interesting part of this research to me, and that was due to the genealogists and going through the libraries and finding this out. And then I think, if I can remember, the professor that did a large study, was it Stouffer's, on passing for white, I realized that there was a underground railroad for passing for white. It was very unique. And when they went through the procedure that they set up, it's like from Virginia to Washington, from Washington and from Maryland all the way to Washington. They had this house where they would go through the back door where the mulatto, because most of the mulatto people were, and they'd come out the front door and say, this is my cousin. The white Hoovers would say, this is my cousin from Baltimore. Well, looking at that cousin, you don't know that in blood is a drop of blood, black blood is in that person. Blue eyes, some of them had brown eyes, but they had straight hair, blonde hair. And I have cousins today that I look at, honestly, I can't tell that they're not Caucasian, but they are.
We all do.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, you remind me of another instance. I don't know if you're a student of J.A. Rogers or not. He was a black historian. Mm-hmm. you might want to read J.A. Rogers if you haven't, because he was doing research 70 years, 60, 70 years ago, right down the lines that you're doing. And they held a contest in Washington, D.C. back in the 20s or 30s, and they had an Abraham Lincoln look-alike contest.
Wow.
And the man who won the contest one year turned out to be black. And I think they canceled the contest after that.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So, and J.A. Rogers had a saying that I really love. He said, to be an expert on race, the first qualification is to be crazy. Because there's a human race, but in America we haven't gotten around to that yet, but we're working on it. We're making progress. Yeah. So for us to say, and I'm sure people watching this interview are, oh, how could she say that this man was black? Or how could somebody say that this man or woman was white? When in effect, there are many people in America who don't have much idea in terms of what their so-called racial mixture is.
This book was about people looking and saying that I'm not ashamed of my bloodline. Yes, I have some black blood in me, and I have some Caucasian blood in me, I have some Indian blood in me, I have some Oriental blood in me. That's what it's about. It's about us looking at each other as one, as a human race, and not starting to say, well, you can't have this job because you're black, you're not smart enough.
The realities of our social organization as a society, however, are that although what you say is legitimate, what all of us feel, people of goodwill feel, but there is in people's minds, there are differences. And in the mind of the man who was called J. Edgar Hoover, he seemed to have great difficulty in accepting people who happened to be of African ancestry. His record as director of the FBI, the anti-Martin Luther King mania almost, his COINTELPRO programs, special programs aimed only at black leaders, a very intolerant legacy he has left. And then to hear your evidence, whether it's right or wrong, that he himself was of the same bloodline of the people that he spent so much time not protecting in his official capacity. And there's one exception. He did Lyndon Johnson a favor down in Philadelphia, Mississippi, when he went after the Klan. Matter of fact, he may have broken a few rules to put the Klan in jail. But with that exception, his record in terms of black people was not favorable. How do you feel
when you
being
think of
a black person who is a relative of a man with that kind of record?
I feel anger. I feel very angry when I first saw that, and I said, how can he be? And I then realized when I was little, I'd say little, 16 years old, watching television when Martin Luther King was killed. Martin Luther King was just my idol. He was my hero. I loved him so much and still do today. I remember clenching my fist on the floor, looking at that television, wanting to go through it because he was on there saying mean things even after his death, you know, and how...
He meaning Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover. And when I would see his face, I would wonder why I had I just would grit my... I was so angry.
Were you aware at that time, or did you believe at that time he was your relative?
No.
You had no idea?
Had no idea. And when I did this research and saw his name, I could see myself clenching again, and that's when I realized I had been told at 10 years old that this man would have killed us all if we had told who he really was.
You say in the book that you were warned. Did the warning come after you started your research, or are you saying that the family all along just was silent because it was afraid that if it did speak up, members of your family,
that's right,
that something would happen to them?
That's right. The family itself was afraid. There was a murder.
And you were in rural Mississippi.
Yes.
So something bad happening to a black person
and something
during that era in particular was not out of the question, was it?
That's right. And while doing this research, I found out that there was a murder in the family, and it's been, nobody knows what happened, who it was. Well, we know who it was, but why? And it's rumors that this particular person was starting to open his mouth. And I believe that my life was saved when my grandfather frightened me, just frightened me to death. I'll put it that way. I found my little self shaken. And when I even talk about it at 50, I'll be 53 years old soon. When I talk about it now, when I say I find myself shaken because I remember just shaking. He said, "You cannot go tell your friends," because he just blurted out, "That old goat is my second cousin." Because I asked him about the Hoover man, because I was in my history class studying J. Edgar Hoover.
Not having any idea?
Not having any idea. I was 10 years old. And I said, "Big Daddy, I just want to know, is this man related to, had anything to do with the Hoovers that had my grandmama Emily?" That's the way I said it. And he said, "Grandmama Emily," he said, "yes." He said, "But," he said, "that old goat is my second cousin." And I was like, oh, I'm going to go tell my friends. Now, as much as I didn't like him, even at 10, because people had said such bad things about him, but at 10 years old, he's the FBI, he's a director. I just thought, oh, they need to know. I'm related to that man. And my grandfather said, no, you can't do that. Then he told me that we would all be killed. And at 10 years old, I'm going to be responsible for the death of myself and my whole family. I couldn't understand it, and it just frightened me, so I prayed and asked God to take that memory away. I woke up the next morning, I cried myself to sleep. When I woke up, I had no memory of J. Edgar Hoover. But I remember after that, because I used to be very inquisitive, I always wanted my grandfather to tell me those stories. You know, it's just wonderful to sit and listen to old people tell stories about who belonged to you and who's your relative. It was just fascinating to me. But after that day, I found myself not wanting to talk. When they would have the meeting, they start talking about the heritage, the legend, or about Grandmama Emily, I would leave. I would find myself, and that was not me.
Well, I don't know what made J. Edgar Hoover tick, because I'm not a psychic, but I do know from my life experience that I have noticed a number of black people who are passing for white. It seems that many of them tend to become very overt bigots, and maybe posturing themselves in the white community as a racist is their way of keeping white people from suspecting that in effect that they have black lineage.
Okay, when a black person gets in a room with another black person, you take on each other's characteristics. I can go in a room with all white people and I'm out of place, and I'm not going to take on that characteristic. So the way I see it is, if he were in the room with Martin Luther King or with someone else, they might see his characteristic because it would fall down. It's just the way we are.
Or he would fear that it might.
And he know it will. We know it will. We are, it's just a part of us. If you think about it, we know each other, and you know the characteristic. You could look at him and tell. If you really take a look at that picture, you could see the characteristic of African American in him.
Well, I think if you take the photograph of most people, you can see all kinds of different racial or ethnic backgrounds in them.
Exactly.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Interesting. The reality of race. J. Edgar Hoover, possibly one of the greatest enemies that African Americans have had in this country government, happens to be of African descent, along with his Caucasian ancestry. And that's real, and that's true. If you don't understand it, we got a Supreme Court justice, a man by the name of Clarence Thomas. And to call him an Uncle Tom would, shall we say, not be doing him justice. Anytime there's a vote on the Supreme Court that lifts up, protects our people, Clarence Thomas is against it. He also married a white woman, a racist, bigoted white woman who lifts up anything that's anti-people, any program that will make sure that the poor are taken care of, any program that lifts up democratic principles, she's against. And she's married to a black man who has the same color of skin that I do. So it happens. And here we have J. Edgar Hoover. Rumors have it is that J. Edgar Hoover is a homosexual. I wouldn't happen to know, but Publicly, he would present his partner. He did not try to hide it very much, whether he was or whether he was not. But one thing we do know that he didn't lift up the fact that he has African ancestry. That he did not lift up and was not very positive about. But sometimes these folks of mixed ancestry who are hiding their color in the closet, they are more bigoted and more racist than the average Joe. I don't know whether he was directly involved in some of these assassinations that have taken place. There were two civil rights leaders, Che Guevara and Featherstone, who ran a bookstore in Washington, D.C., that were assassinated. People don't even mention them. They don't talk about them. There were a number of individuals that lost their lives during the civil rights struggle with the help of the FBI. I don't understand it. Now, I just saw a movie called Mississippi Burning, and I understand it's based on a true story where the FBI went out of its way uh, to stop the Klan from murdering and killing black folks. See, I don't understand. It's a tale of two cities. On one side, you lift folks up, you create community action programs that are there to build business, create public housing, feed the poor. And on the flip side of that, you have the leaders of the civil rights movement under surveillance. You watch them. I had one individual saying, and I'm going to share it with you. One time, I was heavily involved in politics. I was a founder of an organization called the Frederick Douglass Club. Uh, and let me tell you, we were a Republican organization that fought mightily for our democracy, that fought mightily to end racism and discrimination. I was recommended by some of the congressional leadership in that era for a position, high level position in government. Uh, and then the FBI and the CIA got a hold of my records and created lies about who and what I am. It stated that Richard James is a Black Panther. Richard James is a Muslim. Richard James is this and that. I have never been a Black Panther ever in life. I've never been a Muslim ever in life. And I don't see anything wrong with either one being either one. I'm not tearing them down. I'm saying they had written lies, documented lies, that stopped me from receiving the position that had already been designed for me. I even went to the White House and was interviewed, came away feeling very, very, very positive. And I know the background checks that were done by the FBI destroyed my ability to get those positions. Now, oh man, this was years and years and years ago, but it happened. I was truly blessed to have some honest politician to give me a chance. A man by the name of Robert P. Casey Sr. Uh, hired me to head up his affirmative action contract compliance civil rights program for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and had to defend me before the press. The press asking, why did you hire this black militant to head up your civil rights program? And he in turn gave them an historical interview on my experience. I've had many, many years, successful years of running such programs uh, in the Commonwealth, in the health department, welfare department. I ran such programs for the city of Seattle, for King County, and had years of experience in that area. So it wasn't my experience that would stop me. But Casey lifted me up when FBI and others had put me down. And this is reality. I'm not making this up. So when they talk about how they watched King tapped his phone, sent and made up stuff when it wasn't there, and sent lies and threats to King's wife to try to destroy their marriage. They did that. They somebody threatened to do it. They did it. They didn't just threaten uh, with this anonymous letter that they sent. They sent things to Coretta King to try to make things difficult, if not impossible, for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, let me just say this. We're all not perfect. And sometimes we got to give an account of things that we have done. But I'm going to tell you one thing. King was not perfect. But what he was a blessing before God. He was a man of God. And I think that his being placed on this earth was a deliberate thing. If a man hits you on your right cheek, turn to him on your left cheek. He talked about love. And Jesus Christ, if you're a Christian, uh, did away with the rules that were in the Old Testament and said that a new commandment I give unto thee, love thy neighbor as thyself. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Speak to me of love. That's something that J. Edgar Hoover could have learned. We got some specifics. We got another video we want you to watch, and this will give you some of the details of the lineage of J. Edgar, a brother, J. Edgar Hoover. Okay, let's roll it.
Magazine special investigation. Will we be able to uncover a Mississippi Black history mystery?
Ever tell this? That old goat, he's my second cousin.
One woman from Mississippi on a search to find out if J. Edgar Hoover is her cousin. J. Edgar Hoover was a secretive man who went down in history as the father of modern day law enforcement. Did he pass for white?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Throughout history, blacks found it beneficial to pass for white. In the movie Imitation of Life, there's a daughter of a black mother who is single. She is struggling to provide for them. The daughter, who is one of a lighter complexion, moves on with her life without her black mother as she passes for white. However, that's only a movie. But what do you do when you are a little 10-year-old girl from Mississippi who is struggling to find out if the most feared, powerful man in America is your cousin?
Good evening. J. Edgar Hoover has died at the age of 77, the cause given as high blood pressure. For almost every living American generation, Hoover, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, stood as the symbol of incorruptible law enforcement, an untouchable who liked to boast that his men could not be bought. Hoover had dinner last night with his old friend and longtime FBI associate, 71-year-old Clyde Tolson, and then went to his home where his housekeeper found him this morning dead beside his bed. In 1924, during the Coolidge administration, Hoover took over the then scandal-ridden bureau. Thus began a service that spanned 8 presidencies and almost half a century. The 8 presidents under whom he worked, both Democratic and Republican, gave Hoover virtually a free hand to run an FBI he had cleared of political factionalism and made into an investigative organization envied around the world for its efficiency and high standards. Yet toward the later years of his life, Hoover came under increasing criticism from liberals who saw his operations as a big brother-type threat to civil liberties. He was accused of using the FBI as his own public relations instrument, and his preoccupation with the threat of communism seemed dated. Yet Hoover himself saw communism as a real threat to the security of America.
Communists have been, still are, and always will be a menace to freedom, to democratic ideals, to the worship of God, and to America's way of life. I feel that once public opinion is thoroughly aroused, as it is today, the fight against communism is well on its way. Communist Party of the United States is a fifth column if there ever was one.
Hoover visited the Capitol just a month and a half ago to testify at a congressional hearing. And it's there his body will be returned tomorrow to lie in state in the rotunda until shortly before funeral services on Thursday. These rites will be conducted at the National Presbyterian Church at an hour not yet determined. President Nixon will deliver the eulogy, but he may have spoken his epitaph today when he said, "The FBI is the eternal monument honoring this great American." And the president elaborated on that tribute.
It is with a profound sense of personal loss that I learned of the death of J. Edgar Hoover. This truly remarkable man has served his country for 48 years under 8 presidents as director of the FBI with unparalleled devotion and ability and dedication. For 25 years, from the time I came to Washington as a freshman congressman, he's been one of my closest personal friends and advisors. And every American, in my opinion, owes J. Edgar Hoover a great debt for building the FBI into the finest law enforcement organization in the entire world. I have ordered that all the flags in government buildings be flown at half-mast. But I will say that in doing so, that Edgar Hoover, because of his indomitable courage against sometimes very vicious attack, has made certain that the flag of the FBI will always fly high. Thank you.
It was a short while before the public announcement and before flags were lowered to half-staff when FBI teletypes carried the message to agents and FBI employees around the country that the man who had occupied the director's office for nearly 48 years was dead. The work and the public functions of the FBI went on. Announcement of a new arrest in connection with the Yablonsky murders, the regular tours of FBI facilities. Tours that bear the mark of Hoover's lifelong concern over subversion and what he considers its principal source. Those tours went almost as on any other day.
Okay. I mentioned before that Mr. Hoover passed away this morning. He became director on May 10th, 1924. And May 10th of this year, he would have been director for 48 years. Passed away in his sleep of natural causes.
At mid-afternoon, Acting Attorney General Kleindienst read a brief tribute to Hoover.
As might be expected by a person in his position, at the head of an investigative body, he was from time to time the object of misplaced public attack, all of which he bore with the firmness and dignity of greatness. Without political ambition, he shunned any other office and never permitted the FBI to become the least tainted with political influence from any source. More than once he expressed a desire to continue at his post until the end, and his wish has been fulfilled.
Another associate recalled Hoover's reaction to critics who said that he wanted to hang on to his job until the massive new FBI building rising on Pennsylvania Avenue is finished. Hoover had joked, the associate said, if they keep going at the rate they've been going, none of us will be around when it's done.
Another of his favorite buildings was the Mayflower Hotel, the only place besides the racetrack where he was seen regularly in public. Came here most days for lunch, always eating in the same quiet, dark public room, always at the same table, always with his back to the wall. Maitre d' Louis Bayer usually had the meal ready and waiting. It seldom changed. Chicken soup, lightly buttered toast, little else. Waiter Joe Chapman says Mr. Hoover smiled and joked a lot and knew all of the help on a first-name basis.
We kind of miss him, or will miss him, because even the public were expecting him every day when he walked through, and nothing special, just he was pleasant, nice, and people miss him as a great friend.
Well, he's a jolly fellow and easy to wait on, easygoing guy, and he liked for me to tease him a lot, and so we have a lot of fun together.
So it turns out that while J. Edgar Hoover worked hard to have his image in public generally to be that of a tough cop, No one here at the Mayflower, where he often came, ever thought of him that way. Dan Rather, CBS News, the Mayflower Hotel, Washington.
Hoover was a native of Washington, son of a Coast and Geodetic Service employee and the niece of the first Swiss consul of the United States. He never married. The White House announced this evening that President Nixon will name at least a temporary successor to Hoover tomorrow.
Who was J. Edgar Hoover's real father?
Hoover was mysteriously murdered in 1917. At that particular
pen and style, clearly added at a much later date with the certificate number out of order and containing the suffix D, indicating a delayed filing.
Oh, there's no doubt in my mind that the records surrounding J. Edgar Hoover seem very suspicious. There's no doubt about it.
There were a lot of records that were actually smudged, different handwritings, different formats on the documents. They had been white out and then tried to rewrote over it.
And when Hoover finally filed his birth certificate, he also submitted a letter from his church certifying his baptismal record. The letter gives his birth date as June 1st, 1895, with a J-A-N for January written over the June in noticeably different handwriting. And the baptismal record itself lists Hoover's birth date as the 1st of June, not January. Even more curious is the fact that Hoover wasn't baptized until he was 13 years old, when the various churches his family frequented all practiced infant baptism. And though Millie wasn't the first to notice these document discrepancies, she was certainly the first daring enough to discuss them openly.
I had suspicions when I was a brand new agent that he might possibly have some black blood, because one of my jobs in investigating applicant cases, we always check birth records and educational records, death certificates. Just, you know, we're always in the clerk's office, county clerk's office, reviewing records. And flat out said, I think he's part black. And that takes a lot of courage, because you never know who's listening. You know, some submarine in the office would send a letter off to Hoover. Agent so-and-so thinks you're part black. You're gone.
And Millie's research revealed even more evidence that Hoover had been living a lie, not only in claiming to be Caucasian, but also in hiding the fact that he was illegitimate, an outside child, as the oral story stated. And incredibly, documentation of this was found on the application filled out in 1938.
On the application it says if you are legitimate or not,
It says check yes or no. Are you legitimate? And whoever checked it checked no.
Oral history is crucial in black genealogy because with illiteracy and slave trading, slaves had no other way to keep track of their relatives, who were often sold and whose names were sometimes changed at the will of the new slave owners.
My thing was, since white America says that our oral stories, our grandparents sit up and lie to us, or it's just rumors, I wanted to prove it. I set out on a mission to prove that oral history is just as strong, or even probably better, than documented history.
Like many descendants of slaves, Millie's oral family tradition traced all the way back to Africa, and the story was oft repeated as it was passed around campfires, hearths, porches, and family gatherings from generation to generation, that there were 3 very tenacious women in the Allen ancestry leading the lineage through and out of slavery. The first was a young woman known to the family only as Grandmama Elizabeth's mother, who was taken at 16 years of age from Africa to America, where she was impregnated by her slave master, a powerful politician and preacher named Christian Hoover. When her baby was born, it was said the beautiful half-white baby slave girl was named Elizabeth Allen. Elizabeth Allen was also impregnated at a young age by her father, the slave owner, and she gave birth to a beautiful mixed-race baby girl named Emily Allen. This complicated things considerably, since it made Emily both daughter and granddaughter of the slave owner, Christian Hoover.
This is very bizarre, and it's hard to explain because it's like a web. Now, let me explain it to you. Christian Hoover, who was born in 1796, who was a senator, a state legislator, and a minister in Macomb, very well-known man, was married to a white woman by the name of Mary. He had a son. He had 2 sons. We're going to talk about the 2 sons that connected to my family. He had a son by the name of William Hoover, who was born in 1832, and he had a son by the name of Christian, who he named after himself. White wife. Emily came from the slave girl.
According to the oral history, Millie's great-great-grandmother Emily was left behind with her slave master father/grandfather and her white half-brothers and sisters when her mother Elizabeth met and fell in love with another family member named William Hoover, who also impregnated her with a baby they named John.
William Hoover, born 1832, and he was married. He had a white wife named Martha. And then he proceeded to have babies with Martha, his wife, and the slave, which was his sister, and they had 6 children together.
Back in the days of slavery and before birth control, it was not uncommon for women, both black and white, to birth a baby every year or 2. It wasn't talked about openly, but it was likewise not unusual for slave owners to have babies every year or so, not just with their wives, but also with select slave women they called bedwarmers.
That's a secret that they were having.
The mixed-race children that resulted were legally considered black, no matter how white they appeared. And life for them was not necessarily easy.
On one hand, they say white people don't want them. And on the other hand, darker black skin folk are jealous of them. And that goes back to in the big house, you know, the lighter skinned ones got in the big house, so they had better food sometimes, where the darker skinned ones are working out in the field all the time.
And those who opted to pass for white or had it forced upon them, as we shall see in J. Edgar Hoover's case, had it even rougher.
I think it's deadly. I think it's a deadly situation, because if you were passing, you had to make sure they didn't know, and sometimes you had to make sure they didn't know. People actually cut themselves off totally from their family.
Hey. Very, very, very interesting. Brother Hoover, he's been gone for a long, long, long time. But he had African American blood. And I see him no differently than I look at Clarence Thomas, a right-wing conservative, you know, who will vote against his own people and his own self each and every time. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Again, I want to let you know that we're still down in Lebanon at 35 South 8th Street, still lifting up African art, still lifting up our giraffes and our pictures and our oils, sitting down there, enjoying interacting with the folks in that community. Here you see our clothes. We got new masks that came from the Cameroon. We got pictures that come from Guinea-Bissau, Muslim oils. It's all there. Come on down and support us and support yourself. You'll get bargains that you never would think that you would get in the time of this epidemic. There's Maria. Thanks, Maria. Maria helped to keep us afloat, you know, when we had our operation on our back. We're still struggling, but hey, we're making it from day to day. So God bless you. Come and visit with us. Review some of that information in regards to J. Hoover. This is a historical kind of thing. He's gone and been gone, but his trademark, or whatever you want to say, is still on the American scene. So then again, I want to say to you, my friends, my family, thanks everybody for supporting the Richard James Show. We really continue to appreciate Brother Thomas and his family, and continuing this broadcast. There's a lot of work involved in this stuff, a lot of hours. And when you have a family and you have a commitment to that, and you do this too, it can get really, really interesting. So thank you, my friends. Thank you for my family. I just want to say to you, much love to all of you. So long, and take care till next time.
Thank you again for tuning in to the Richard James Show. Our African American program are set up to educate you on what's going on in your world. And thank you for taking out the time to listen. Let's hear from you sometime also. So this is your neighbor and your friend signing off. Until I see you again next week and hear from you again next week. So long. God bless.